The air inside the small bistro was thick, hanging heavy with the mixed scents of roasted garlic, strong coffee, and the sharp, acidic smell of cleaning solution used on the tables. It was that specific time of the evening, somewhere between 9 and 10, where the rush had finally slowed down, but the mess left behind was at its worst. The noise level had dropped from a roar to a dull hum, made up mostly of the clinking sounds of silverware hitting plates and the low murmur of tired voices. For Anna, the night felt like it had been going on for 100 years. She stood behind the service counter, leaning her weight against the edge just to give her aching feet a break. She was 26, though the fatigue around her eyes sometimes made her look older. She wore the standard uniform, a black apron tied tightly around her waist, the fabric stained with a splash of marinara sauce from a dinner rushed 2 hours ago. Her hair was pulled back into a strict ponytail, and a few loose strands stuck to the side of her neck where sweat had gathered. She looked out over the room. There were only a few tables left occupied. A couple in the corner was sharing a dessert, barely speaking to each other, just the glow of their phones lighting up their faces. Near the window, a man in a sharp suit was typing furiously on a laptop, his expression annoyed, as if the very existence of other people was slowing him down. Anna sighed, a sound that got lost in the ambient noise of the kitchen. This wasn't where she thought she would be. If you had asked her 10 years ago, back when she was practicing scales for 4 hours a day in her parents' living room, she would have told you she'd be on a stage somewhere. She would have told you about the conservatory programs she applied to, the dreams of grand halls and velvet seats. But life had a way of happening while you were making other plans. Money ran out, responsibilities piled up, and the dream of playing music for a living got slowly pushed aside to make room for paying rent and keeping the lights on. Her eyes drifted across the room to the far corner. It was a space that was usually empty, save for a small round table and a large object covered by a thick cloth to protect it from dust and spills. It was an upright piano. It was old, the finish scratched in places, and it hadn't been tuned in months, but it was there. The owner of the bistro, an older man who liked the idea of class more than the reality of it, had bought it cheap from a thrift store. He thought it made the place look like a real jazz club, even though no one ever played it. Anna walked out from behind the counter, carrying a pot of decaffeinated coffee. She moved automatically, her feet knowing the path between the tables without her needing to look down. She stopped at the table of the man in the suit. He didn't look up as she poured the coffee. He just kept typing. She didn't take it personally. To him, she was just part of the furniture, a mechanism to deliver caffeine and clear plates. She moved to the next table, gathering up dirty dishes. The plates were heavy, coated in the remains of steak and potatoes. She stacked them carefully on her arm, a skill she perfected over years of serving. She headed back to the kitchen, pushed through the swinging plastic flaps that separated the dining area from back, and dropped the dishes into the plastic bin. The crash was loud, but the dishwasher didn't even look up. He was elbow deep in soapy water, scrubbing hard at a frying pan. "Busy night?" he asked, his voice muffled. "It's over now," Anna said, wiping her hands on a towel. Just the stragglers left. She leaned against the stainless steel counter for a moment, closing her eyes. The vibration of the refrigerator motor hummed against her back. In the quiet of the kitchen, she could hear a melody in her head. It was a piece she had been hearing all day, ever since she woke up. It wasn't a famous song or something from the radio. It was something she had been making up in her head, little by little. She often heard music this way, complex chords and winding melodies that accompanied her while she scrubbed floors or folded laundry. She reached into the pocket of her apron. Her fingers brushed against a crumpled piece of paper. She pulled it out and smoothed it out on the counter. It was a receipt from a grocery store, and on the back, written in blue ink that was starting to fade, were notes and staffs. It was the only place she could write them down when they came to her. The notes were cramped, squeezed in between the list of items she had bought: milk, bread, eggs, and the total at the bottom. She looked at the notes. It was a simple progression, but it sounded beautiful in her head. It sounded sad but hopeful, exactly how she felt most days. "You okay, Anna?" She jumped slightly, stuffing the receipt back into her pocket. The chef was looking at her, a spoon in his hand. "Yeah," she said quickly. "Just tired. Long shift." Go get the last tables, and you can clock out, he said, turning back to the stove. Anna nodded and left the kitchen. As she walked back into the dining room, her path took her past the covered piano. She slowed down. Usually, she walked right past it, busy, focused on the customers. But tonight, the room was quiet enough that she could hear the silence. She stopped and stood next to the instrument. She reached out a hand and lifted the corner of the heavy cloth. Underneath, the keys looked yellowed, slightly uneven. It wasn't a Steinway. It wasn't a Bosendorfer. It was a beat-up piece of furniture that had seen better days. But to Anna, it looked like home. She looked around to make sure no one was watching. The couple was still staring at their phones. The man in the suit was taking a drink of coffee. Anna pulled the cloth back, just enough to expose the keyboard. She hovered her fingers over the keys. They were trembling, just a little. She hadn't played properly in months. Her hands were rough now from handling hot plates and scrubbing tables, callous on the tips. She wondered if she could even hit the notes cleanly anymore. She wondered if the stiffness in her shoulders would translate into stiffness in her music. She pressed down on the middle C. The sound was duller than she remembered, slightly out of tune, but it rang out clearly in the quiet room. It was a single note, but it felt loud in the empty space. The man in the suit stopped typing for a second and looked up, annoyed at the noise. Anna quickly pulled her hand back and smoothed the cloth down over the keys, covering them up again. She felt a flush of embarrassment, even though she hadn't done anything wrong. She adjusted her apron and picked up the coffee pot again, walking toward the man's table to offer a refill. "More coffee?" she asked, her voice professional and polite. The man looked at her, his eyes scanning her face, then the piano in the distance, then back to his computer screen. "No," he said curtly. "I'm actually working. It's a bit too quiet in here. It's distracting." "Oh," Anna said softly. "I'm sorry." "Fix it," he said, waving his hand vaguely. "Put some music on. Or play that thing. I don't care. Just make it less dead in here." Anna paused. "Play." The man laughed, a short, sharp sound. "Yes, play. You work here. I assume someone knows how to turn it on. Just play something simple. I need background noise, not a concert." He went back to his typing, dismissing her from his mind. Anna stood there for a moment. Simple. He wanted something simple. He thought she was just a waitress. He thought the piano was just a decoration, a prop to make the room look nice. He didn't know that she had spent her childhood competing in festivals. He didn't know that she could play Rachmaninoff and Chopin from memory. He didn't know that the paper in her pocket held a piece of her soul. She walked over to the piano, her heart beating faster than it had when she was running food during the dinner rush. She sat down on the bench. It was hard and uncomfortable. She reached into her pocket and touched the crumpled grocery receipt. She looked at the man by the window. He wanted noise. He wanted a distraction. He wanted simple. Anna placed her hands on the keys, the cold plastic feeling familiar and strange at the same time. She took a deep breath. She was tired. Her feet hurt. She had rent due tomorrow. But for the first time in a long time, she wasn't going to be just the girl who brought the coffee. She closed her eyes for a brief second, hearing the melody in her head, the one she had written on the back of the receipt. It was complex. It was difficult. It was anything but simple. She flexed her fingers, feeling the tension in her knuckles release, and began to play. The sound of the first few chords didn't just fill the room. It seemed to push against the walls, demanding space. Anna expected the man in the suit to tell her to stop, or perhaps to ignore her completely, treating her music like the hum of the refrigerator. But when the first low, resonant note faded, she noticed something had changed. The aggressive clacking of the laptop keys had stopped. She sat with her back straighter now, the fatigue in her shoulders temporarily forgotten. Her fingers, usually so careful with ceramic plates and glass cups, pressed down on the yellowed ivory with firmness that surprised her. The piano was out of tune, the higher notes having a slightly tinny, sharp edge to them. But she adjusted instantly. She knew how to compensate for an imperfect instrument, bending the rhythm slightly to make the discordant sound intentional. The music she chose wasn't the simple background noise the man had asked for. It was a piece she knew intimately, a complex and moody piece that required strength. As her left hand began to walk down the scale in a steady, heavy rhythm, the man in the suit turned his chair around. He wasn't looking at his computer anymore. He was looking at her. Anna kept her eyes fixed on the keys. She didn't want to make eye contact. If she looked up and saw a bored face, she knew she would lose her nerve. She would shrink back into the role of the waitress, apologize for the noise, and go back to the kitchen to scrub dishes. So she watched her own hands, leaping across the octaves, and let the music take the lead. The couple in the corner, who had been silently scrolling through their social media feeds, lowered their phones. The woman tapped her husband on the arm and pointed toward the corner of the room. They weren't looking at a waitress anymore. They were looking at a musician. The atmosphere in the bistro shifted. The air felt different, charge and energy that hadn't been there when it was just a place to eat. The piece Anna was playing was intense. It wasn't a happy tune. It had a dark, rolling quality to it, like a storm gathering far out at sea. It reflected the heaviness she felt in her chest, the exhaustion of working double shifts, the ache of missing out on a life she thought she would have. But as she reached the chorus of the song, the music soared. It became loud and triumphant. Her foot pressed down on the pedal, and the sound vibrated to the floorboards and up into bench. She felt a sudden rush of adrenaline. This was the feeling she used to live for. It was better than coffee, better than sleep. It was a feeling of being completely in control of something beautiful. For the first time in years, her hands weren't serving someone else. They were serving her. The man in the suit stood up. Anna saw him in her peripheral vision. He walked away from his table, leaving his laptop open and vulnerable. He walked closer to the piano, standing near the entrance to the kitchen. He crossed his arms. For a second, Anna was terrified he was going to yell at her for playing too loudly, but he didn't say a word. He just stood there, his face unreadable, listening. The busboy, a young kid named Tom who usually had his headphones in and bobbed his head to rap music, had stopped sweeping. He leaned against the broom, his mouth slightly open, watching Anna's fingers fly across the keys. He had no idea she could do this. To him, she was just a lady who told him to take out the trash. Now, she was creating magic out of thin air. Anna played faster. The complexity of the music increased, the notes tumbling over one another like a waterfall. She was sweating now, not from the heat of the kitchen, but from the exertion of performance. She could feel the pulse of the song in her wrists. It was a difficult technical section, one she used to mess up when she was nervous in school. She approached the difficult run of notes. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Asterisk, don't miss. Don't miss. Asterisk, she took a breath and let her muscle memory take over. Her fingers moved like a blur. The notes rang out clear and fast and perfect. She hit the final chord of the sequence with a sharp accent, letting it hang in the air. She didn't stop. She moved right into the next section, softer now, more delicate. The bistro was dead silent. You couldn't hear the traffic outside. You couldn't hear the fridge humming. The only sound was the music. It was a strange, surreal moment for Anna. She was still wearing her stained apron. She still had aching feet and a crumpled receipt in her pocket. But for these few minutes, she wasn't defined by those things. She was defined by the sound she was making. The man in the suit took a step closer. He looked at the piano, then at Anna, then back at the piano. He seemed to be trying to solve a puzzle. How could someone this talented be working here? It didn't make sense to him. In his world, people were sorted. Talented people were on stages. Regular people served coffee. Seeing the two worlds collide confused him, but it also fascinated him. Anna felt the music beginning to wind down. She was approaching the end of the piece. The notes became slower, more spaced out. She played a final, haunting melody line high up in the treble clef, her fingers gentle and precise. And then, with a deep, resonant bass note, she stopped. She lifted her hands off the keys and placed them in her lap. The silence that rushed back and was heavy, but it wasn't an empty silence anymore. It was full. Anna sat there, her chest rising and falling, waiting for her heart to slow down. She was scared to turn around. She felt exposed, as if she had taken off her uniform and stood there in her underwear. She had shown them a part of herself she kept hidden away. Now she had to face them. She slowly turned on the bench. The couple in the corner was smiling. The woman was wiping a tear from her eye. Tom, the busboy, was grinning widely, shaking his head in disbelief. Anna looked at the man in the suit. He was standing just a few feet away. He didn't look annoyed anymore. He looked impressed. He looked at her with a new kind of respect, the kind you give to an equal, not to a service worker. "I asked for something simple," he said. His voice wasn't loud. It was quiet, almost awed. That was not simple. Anna felt her face get hot. She smoothed her apron nervously. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice quiet. I started playing and I couldn't help it." "Don't apologize," the man said firmly. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a wallet. He didn't just pull out a single dollar bill for a tip. He pulled out a larger bill and placed it on the lid of the piano. "That was worth 10 times the price of my coffee. Why are you serving tables? You should be in a concert hall." Anna looked at the money, then back at him. She shrugged, feeling a little sad but also a little proud. "Life gets in the way sometimes," she said. "I have to pay rent." The man nodded slowly. "Well," he said, "the rent is lucky to have you." He picked up his coat from the back of his chair. "I have to go, but I'm glad I stayed to hear that." He turned and walked toward the exit. Before he opened the door, he stopped and looked back one more time. "Thank you," he said. Then he walked out into the night. The couple in the corner stood up. As they passed by the piano on their way to the register, the woman stopped. "That was beautiful," she said softly. "Really beautiful. You made our night." "Thank you," Anna whispered. She didn't know what else to say. It felt strange to be praised for something she felt she should have been doing all along. They paid their bill and left. Anna was left alone in the bistro with Tom and the chef, who had come out of the kitchen to see what the commotion was about. "I didn't know you could play like that, Anna," Tom said, finally moving from a spot near the broom. "Why are you always hiding that?" Anna looked at her hands. They were trembling again. "I guess I just forgot for a while," she said. "I didn't think anyone wanted to hear it." The chef, a big man who rarely gave compliments, wiped his hands on his apron. "It sounded good," he grunted. "Made the place feel fancy. You can finish up here. Go home and get some rest." Anna smiled a genuine smile. It reached her eyes for the first time that night. She realized her hands didn't hurt anymore. Her feet didn't ache. The exhaustion of the shift had been burned away by the music. She stood up from the bench and walked back to the counter to print out the final checks. She was still just a waitress, and tomorrow she would have to come back and do it all over again. But tonight, she had played, and that made all the difference. The soft chime of bell above the entrance signaled the departure of the last customer, leaving the shop in a quiet that felt entirely different from before. It wasn't the empty, lonely silence of closing time. It was a heavy, thoughtful silence. The air seemed to still be vibrating with the last notes she had played. Anna stood behind the counter, her hands resting on the cool surface, staring at the empty tables. Her heart was still beating a little faster than normal, a steady rhythm in her chest that matched the adrenaline fading from her veins. She felt lighter. It was a strange sensation, given that her body was physically exhausted and her feet were throbbing inside her sensible non-slip shoes. But her mind felt clear. The fog that usually clouded her brain after a long shift, the fog made of orders, complaints, and the monotony of routine, had lifted. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel the urge to rush to the back room, take off her apron, and escape into the anonymity of the street. She wanted to stay in this moment. Tom, the busboy, was already moving around the dining room, flipping the chairs upside down onto the tables so he could sweep the floor. He moved with a little more energy tonight, occasionally glancing over at the piano in the corner with a look of newfound curiosity. "So, are you going to play some more?" he asked, leaning on his broom. He didn't have his headphones on tonight. "Or is the show over?" Anna looked at the covered piano. The cloth was still pulled back slightly, exposing the keys like a dark smile. She thought about what the man in the suit had said. He had asked for something simple, and she had given him a storm of complexity. She had shown him her anger and her frustration through the loud, crashing chords of the song she knew, but playing that hadn't exhausted the music inside her. If anything, it had just woken it up. "I don't know," Anna said softly. "I should probably finish closing up." "Come on," Tom urged, gesturing with his hand. The chef is doing the dishes. It's just us. No one to tell you to turn it down. Anna looked toward the kitchen pass. The chef was indeed busy, the sounds of clattering pots and water running drifting out. She looked back at the piano. Her fingers twitched slightly, remembering the feel of the keys, the paper in her pocket, the grocery receipt with her own scribbles on it. Seemed to burn against her hip. She had been hearing that melody in her head for weeks. It was a quiet, wandering tune, nothing like the dramatic piece she had just performed. It was unsure of itself, just like she was. She walked out from behind the counter. "Just for a few minutes," she said, more to herself than to Tom. "Then we really have to clean up." She sat back down on the bench. It felt familiar now, less like a foreign object and more like an old friend she had neglected. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the crumpled receipt. She smoothed it out on the music stand of the piano, squinting at her own messy handwriting in the dim light. The ink had smudged a little where her thumb had rubbed against it all day. Tom stopped sweeping and sat on a chair near the kitchen, watching intently. Anna took a deep breath. She wasn't playing for a crowd tonight. She wasn't playing to prove a point to a rude customer. She was playing to see if the music in her head was real. She placed her hands on the keys. She didn't strike them hard this time. She pressed down gently, coaxing a soft, sweet melody from the worn-out instrument. The song was slower. It didn't have the technical flash of the last one. It was simple in a way that the truth is simple, direct and honest. The notes wandered up and down the scale, searching for something. It sounded like walking through a quiet park in autumn or looking out a window on a train ride. It was filled with a longing that made Anna's throat feel tight. As she played, the tension in her shoulders finally let go. She closed her eyes. She didn't need to see the keys. She knew where they were. She thought about the little apartment she lived in, the one with a window that looked out onto a brick wall. She thought about the dusty stacks of sheet music she had stored in her closet, boxed up when she moved out her parents' house. She thought about the years she had spent telling herself that music was just a hobby, that she wasn't good enough, that it wasn't a real job. But here, in the empty bistro, with the smell of coffee and floor wax surrounding her, it felt like the most real thing in the world. The melody shifted. It moved into a minor key, sadder now. Her left hand played a repetitive, steady pattern, while her right hand played notes that floated above it like bubbles. It was a sound of loneliness, but it wasn't a desperate loneliness. It was a peaceful kind of solitude. She realized she was playing for herself. She was playing for the girl she used to be, the one who sat at a pristine piano in a sunlit room, dreaming of the future. She was telling that girl that it was okay, that the future was harder than she thought, but that the music was still there. It hadn't left. She played on, losing track of time. The song didn't really have an ending. It just circled around, exploring different feelings. Sometimes it sounded hopeful. Sometimes it sounded like a question. Anna let her fingers guide her, improvising little runs that she had never written down. She felt a sense of freedom she hadn't felt in years. There were no judges here, no teachers correcting her posture, no audience expecting perfection, just the sound of the strings vibrating inside the wood. When she finally let her hands fall into her lap, the silence returned, but it was a gentle silence. It didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt like a pause between friends. Anna opened her eyes. The room looked different. The scratches on the tables and the scuffs on the floor didn't look ugly. They just looked like the marks of life. The bistro was just a room, but it was a room where she had remembered who she was. Tom was sitting still, the broom lying forgotten on the floor next to him. He looked a little dazed. "That one was even better," he said quietly. "It sounded, I don't know, it sounded like you." Anna looked at him, surprised. Yeah, he nodded. The first one was like, "Wow, look at me go." But this one was like listening to you talk. Anna smiled, a small, tired smile. That's exactly what it was. She carefully took the receipt from the music stand and folded it back up. She didn't put it in her pocket this time. Instead, she held it in her hand, looking at the faded ink. She realized she didn't need to hide it anymore. She didn't need to hide this part of herself away in the cracks of her day, waiting for breaks and lonely moments. All right, she said, standing up and smoothing her apron. "Let's get this place cleaned up. I actually want to get home." Tom hopped up, grabbing his broom. "You're going to play tomorrow night, right?" Anna paused. She thought about the early shift she had to work, the mountain of laundry waiting for her, and the exhaustion that would surely hit her by morning. But then she thought about the feeling of the keys under her fingers. "Maybe," she said, "if the piano behaves itself." She walked back to the counter to cash out the register. Her hands felt steady. As she counted the coins and bills, she hummed a low tune under her breath. It was a melody she had just played. It was stuck in her head now, but in a good way. It was a reminder that even in the middle of a hard life, full of hard work and small wages, there was still room for beauty. You just had to be brave enough to sit down and play it. She finished counting the money and dropped the drawer into the safe under the counter. She took off her apron and hung it on the hook by the fridge, ready for tomorrow. She grabbed her coat and her bag. "Night, Tom," she called out as she headed for the exit. "Night, Anna. See you tomorrow." She pushed the exit bar and stepped out into the cool night air. The street was quiet, the streetlights casting long shadows on the sidewalk. She took a deep breath, filling her lungs with the fresh air. She wasn't a famous concert pianist. She wasn't a star. She was just Anna, walking home to her small apartment. But as she walked down the street, her steps had a little spring in them. She had a song in her pocket and the music in her heart. And for tonight, that was enough. The morning sun hit the pavement with a brightness that felt almost mocking. Anna walked toward the bistro with a paper cup of cheap coffee in her hand, her eyes squinting against the glare. After the emotional high of the night before, the morning felt heavy and gray, as if the magic had evaporated with the rising sun. The adrenaline was gone, replaced by the familiar stiffness in her muscles and the dull ache of routine. When she pushed open the service entrance to the kitchen, the reality of the job hit her instantly. The chef was already yelling at a delivery driver about a missing crate of tomatoes, and the smell of raw fish and floor cleaner assaulted her nose. Anna hung up her coat and tied her apron, the fabric feeling rough against her skin. She looked at her hands. Last night, they had flown across the piano keys with grace and power. Today, they were just hands again, tools for carrying trays and scrubbing counters. "You're late," the chef grunted as she walked past. "The lunch rush is going to be a nightmare. Get out there and set up the tables." "On it," Anna said, her voice flat. She walked out into the dining room. The sun was streaming through the windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. The room looked so ordinary in the daylight. The piano sat in the corner, still covered by the heavy cloth, looking like a piece of forgotten furniture rather than a portal to another world. Anna walked over to it. She hesitated for a moment, her hand hovering over the cloth. But then she pulled her hand back. She felt a sudden shyness, a fear that last night had been fluke. If she played now, would the magic still be there? Or would she just hear a tired, out-of-tune piano in a cheap restaurant? She turned away and began to wipe down the tables. She moved through the motions, her body working on autopilot, while her mind wandered back to the piece of paper in her pocket. She had transferred the notes from the crumpled receipt to a fresh notebook she had found at the bottom of her bag. It felt more permanent now, but also more fragile. By the time noon arrived, the bistro was packed. The noise level was deafening compared to the quiet of the previous night. The chatter of business people on their lunch breaks, the clattering of dishes, and the hiss of the espresso machine created a wall of sound that blocked out any possibility of thought. Anna was in the weeds, running from table to table, her legs burning. She didn't have time to think about music. She didn't have time to feel. She was just a vessel for food and drink, until she saw the woman, a woman in her 60s, with silver hair pulled back in an elegant bun and a sharp blazer, walked in alone. She didn't look like the usual lunch crowd. She didn't pull out a phone or a newspaper. She just sat at a small table near the window, looking around the room with a critical eye. When Anna walked over to take her order, the woman looked at her, not through her. "Hello," the woman said. Her voice was crisp and clear. "Ice water, please. With lemon." "Of course," Anna said, scribbling on her pad. "Are you ready to order, or do you need a few minutes?" "I'm ready," the woman said. "Just a garden salad." No dressing. Anna nodded and walked away to get the water. When she returned, the woman was looking at the covered piano in the corner. "Do you have music here often?" the woman asked. Anna paused, surprised by the question. "Not really. I mean, sometimes we have a stereo system. But live music? No." "Shame," the woman said, taking a sip of her water. "It's a good room for acoustics. High ceilings, hard surfaces." Anna looked at the woman, really seeing her for the first time. There was something about the way she held herself, the way she spoke about the room. "You know about music?" The woman smiled. It was a kind smile, but it held the authority of someone who knew what they were talking about. "I used to be a town scout. A long time ago. I looked for pianists specifically." Anna felt her heart skip a beat. She instinctively touched the pocket where her notebook was. "Oh, that sounds interesting." "It was a hard life," the woman said. "A lot of talent out there, but very few people who have something unique to say. Most of them play the notes perfectly, but they don't feel them. It's just noise." She looked directly at Anna. "Do you play?" Anna felt the blood rush to her cheeks. She looked down at her notepad. "A little. I mean, not professionally." "Playing isn't a profession," the woman said softly. "It's a way of speaking. Do you speak?" Anna looked up. The noise of the restaurant seemed to fade away, just like it had the night before. She thought about the melody she had written, the way it felt to pour her loneliness into the keys. She thought about the man in the suit who had underestimated her. "I played a little last night," Anna admitted, "after we closed." "Did anyone hear you?" "My coworker and a customer." The woman raised an eyebrow. "And what did they say?" Anna thought about Tom's awe and the customer's respect. They said it was good." The woman laughed, a short, bright sound. "Good is the worst compliment in the world. It means you didn't offend anyone. It means you were safe." She leaned in slightly. "Were you safe?" Anna looked at the piano. She remembered the storm of the first song, the raw emotion of the second. She shook her head. "No, I wasn't safe." "Good," the woman said. She picked up her fork. "Thank you for the water. My salad will be fine." Anna walked away, her mind spinning. She didn't know who this woman was. She might just be a lonely old lady who liked to talk about the past. But her words had struck a nerve. It's a way of speaking. The lunch rush continued, but Anna felt a change in the air. Every time she passed the piano, it seemed to be calling to her louder. The cover over the keys looked less like a protective layer and more like a cage. Around 2 o'clock, the rush died down. The silver-haired woman finished her salad, left a generous tip, and gathered her things. As she walked past Anna on her way to the exit, she stopped. "The acoustics in here are wasted on silence," she said quietly. She tapped a manicured finger on the counter. "If you have something to say, you should say it, before you forget how." Then she was gone, stepping out into the bright afternoon sun. Anna stood alone in the center of the room. The bistro was quiet again, save for the hum of the refrigerator. The chef was in the back, taking a break. Tom was in the restroom. It was just her and the piano. She walked over to the corner. Her hands were shaking, but not from fear this time. It was an itch, a desperate need. She pulled the cloth off the piano. The keys stared back at her, yellowed and inviting. She sat down. She didn't take out the notebook. She didn't need to look at the notes. She knew them by heart now. They were etched into her mind. She placed her hands on the keys. She thought about the woman's words. "Don't be safe." She took a deep breath and pressed down. She didn't start with the soft melody she had played the night before. She started with a jarring, dissonant chord that rang out like a shout in a library. It was a sound of frustration, of years wasted, of dreams buried under dirty dishes and rent checks. Then her left hand began to pound out a rhythm. It was fast, angry, and intense. Her right hand joined in, playing a melody that fought against rhythm. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't nice. It was raw. She poured everything into it. The morning stiffness, the sore feet, the feeling of being invisible to the people she served. She played the exhaustion of the single mother she saw on the bus, the anger of the homeless man on the corner, the fear she felt every time she looked at her bank account. The sound was huge in the empty room. It bounced off the windows and the ceiling. Anna's hair came loose from her ponytail. She was sweating, her breath coming in gasps. She wasn't thinking about technique anymore. She was just letting the sound pour out of her. She was fighting back against a world with nothing but 88 keys. Then, suddenly, the anger broke. The music shifted. The heavy pounding slowed. The melody softened. It turned into something else, something fragile and hopeful. It was the sound of waking up and seeing the sun. It was the sound of a stranger telling you that you matter. Anna played the last few bars with gentleness that brought tears to her own eyes. She held the final chord, letting it ring out until the string stopped vibrating completely. She sat there, her chest heaving, her hands trembling on the keys. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of electricity. She realized with a sudden clarity that she couldn't keep doing this. She couldn't keep locking this part of herself away. She didn't know what the future looked like. She didn't know if she would ever be famous or rich. But she knew that she had to play. She had to speak. She pulled her hands back and looked at them. They were red from the force of the playing. But they didn't look like waitress hands anymore. They looked like artist hands. From the kitchen, the chef started clapping. It was a slow, rhythmic clap. Tom emerged from the hallway, a huge grin on his face, cheering. Anna smiled, a real smile, one that reached all the way to her soul. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was finally, truly alive, and the music wasn't finished. It was just beginning. The sound of the chef's clapping echoed in the room, steady and rhythmic against the lingering hum of the piano strings. It wasn't polite applause. It was a heavy, appreciative clap of a man who knew hard work when he saw it. Tom was whistling and cheering, leaning against the doorframe with a look of pure delight on his face. Anna sat on the bench, frozen for a moment, her hands hovering over the keys. Her heart was hammering against her ribs, so hard she could feel it in her throat. She took a deep, shuddering breath. Try to let the adrenaline fade without letting the feeling of victory disappear with it. She stood up slowly, her legs feeling a little unsteady, like she had just stepped off a moving boat. She turned to face the kitchen pass. The chef was standing there, wiping his hands on his apron, a rare grin creasing his face. "Okay," he said, his voice gruff but warm. "I told you to clean the tables, not shake the walls. But I'll let it slide this time." That was something else. Anna felt the heat rise in her cheeks. It wasn't embarrassment, exactly, but a feeling of being seen, truly seen, for the first time in a long time. "Thanks," she managed to say. "I got a little carried away." "Carried away is good," Tom chimed in, walking over the piano and looking at it as if it were a new person. "You got to do that again. Seriously, Anna, every night we can put up a sign or something. Live music, the Waitress." Anna laughed, a short, incredulous sound. "I don't think anyone would come just to hear the Waitress play, Tom." "You'd be surprised," the chef said, turning back to the stove. "People can tell when something is real. They're hungry for it. They come in here for the food, sure, but they leave talking about the feeling. You gave them a feeling today." Anna looked around the empty bistro. The afternoon sun was shifting, casting long, golden shadows across the floor. The room looked the same: scuffed tables, chairs stacked on surfaces, the smell of coffee and cleaning spray. But it felt different. It felt like a place where things could happen. It felt like a stage. She walked over to the coffee machine to start a pot for the dinner crew, but her movements were slower, more deliberate. She wasn't just rushing through the motions anymore. Her mind was racing. The woman's words from lunch kept coming back to her. Asterisk is a way of speaking. If you have something to say, you should say it. Asterisk. Anna realized that she had been whispering for years. She had been hiding her talent, keeping it small and safe, tucked away in the cracks of her busy life. But today she had shouted, and the world hadn't ended. In fact, the world had leaned in to listen. She poured herself a cup of coffee and walked to the back office to clock out. As she passed a mirror in the hallway, she stopped. She looked at her reflection. Her hair was messy, her uniform was wrinkled, and she looked tired. But her eyes were bright. There was a spark there that hadn't been there that morning. She didn't look like someone who was just surviving the week. She looked like someone who had a future. She clocked out, gathered her things, and said her goodbyes. As she pushed open the back exit, The cool evening air hit her face. The city was waking up for the night. Cars were honking in the distance, and the street lights were flickering on. Anna pulled her coat tighter around her and began to walk to the bus stop. Usually, this was the worst part of her day. Her feet would hurt, her back would ache, and she would stare at the pavement, counting the steps until she could get home and collapse on the couch. But tonight, she walked with her head up. She looked at the people passing her. The students with backpacks, the couples holding hands, the business people hurrying home. She wondered what music was inside them. She wondered what they were hiding. She reached the bus stop and sat on the metal bench. A few other people were waiting, all staring at their phones. Anna reached into her pocket and pulled out the small notebook where she had transferred her music. She opened it to the page with the melody. The notes were scrawled in blue ink, slightly messy, but they looked beautiful to her. She hummed the tune softly under her breath. It was a quiet sound, barely audible over the traffic noise, but it felt powerful. An older woman sitting next to her looked up from her phone. She didn't look annoyed. She smiled. "What a lovely tune," the woman said. "Is that from a movie?" Anna looked at her, surprised. She hesitated for a second. The old Anna would have said, "I don't know. I just heard it somewhere," to avoid attention. But the new Anna, the one who had just unleashed a storm in the middle of a restaurant, shook her head. "No," Anna said, her voice steady. "I wrote it." The woman's eyes widened. "You wrote that? It's beautiful. You have a gift, dear." "Thank you," Anna said. She meant it. The bus arrived, rumbling to a halt in front of them. Anna got on and found a seat near the window. She watched the city slide by as the bus drove through the streets. She thought about her apartment. It was small and cramped, and the piano in the corner was an old electronic keyboard she had bought at a pawn shop. It had weighted keys, which helped, but it didn't have the soul of the upright at the bistro. She made a decision right there, looking out at the passing storefronts. She was going to start playing again, really playing, not just when she had a spare 5 minutes, but as a discipline. She was going to practice until her hands stopped hurting. She was going to finish the piece she had started on the receipt. She was going to write more. Maybe she wouldn't be a famous concert pianist. Maybe she would still have to work shifts to pay the bills. But that didn't mean the music wasn't real. It didn't mean she wasn't a musician. She realized that being a musician wasn't about a stage or a paycheck. It was about how you saw the world. It was about the song in your heart that refused to be quiet. The bus stopped near her building. Anna got off and walked up the steps to her apartment. She unlocked the heavy door and walked inside. It was dark and quiet. She dropped her bag on the floor and didn't even bother taking off her coat. She walked straight to the corner where her keyboard sat, covered in a thin layer of dust. She pulled the cover off. She plugged it in. The small power light blinked on. It wasn't a grand piano. It wasn't the bistro's upright. It was hers. She sat down on the bench. It squeaked under her weight. She placed her hands on the plastic keys. They were cold. She closed her eyes and pictured the bistro, the sunlight hitting the tables, the chef clapping, the woman telling her to speak. She started to play. The sound wasn't perfect. The speakers buzzed a little, and the sustain wasn't quite right. But the melody was there. It flowed out of her, filling the small room, pushing against the walls. She played the sad part, the angry part, and the hopeful part. She played for the waitress she had been that morning, and the artist she was becoming. She played until her fingers were tired, and her hunger could no longer be ignored. She stopped and sat in the dark, listening to the silence of her apartment. It wasn't a lonely silence anymore. It was a peaceful silence. Anna stood up, finally taking off her coat. She went to the small kitchenette and made herself a simple dinner. As she ate, she hummed the melody again. She knew she had to work the next morning. She knew there would be rude customers and spilled coffee and long hours on her feet. But underneath all of that, there was the music. It was a foundation now. She wasn't just waiting for her life to start anymore. She was living it, and she knew that no matter what happened, no matter how hard the shift was, she could always sit down at a piano and play something simple, or she could play something that changed everything. The choice was hers, and that was the most beautiful feeling of all.